So I would like to thank everyone for attending today in this first in a series of 3 webinars where we're going to be talking about how businesses and in particular HR teams can really excel and enable themselves to drive some strategic value during the time of COVID-19 and the response that all of us all over the world are going through as we try to navigate this kind of new world of work. As I mentioned, this is a live webinar and it will be recorded. We will be posting this recording on our Sage People website, and I believe RSM is also going to be posting it as well. We will be sure to communicate to all attendees where you can find the recording of this and the future webinars after the program. I would like to ask that you please ask any questions using the questions pane in your GoToWebinar toolbar. We will have some time at the end where we will try to answer as many questions as we can. If at any time during today's presentation you encounter any issues with the audio or you lose video, please also put that information in the questions queue so that we can make sure that we're taking a break and investigating as needed. Today's webinar is presented by Sage People and RSM. RSM is a global network of audit, tax, and consulting experts with offices all over the world. Jennifer Busse is the national leader of their people and organization management consulting practice and has more than 20 years of experience working with businesses to drive HR and people solutions, as well as drive organizational transformation. Marni Rozen is a management consulting director at RSM and specializes in talent management operations, working with her clients to increase productivity and systems management. Sage People is a global HRIS platform specializing in the support of mid-market global businesses, helping them to execute their HR and people strategies by leveraging the power of Salesforce-based technology. I, your moderator today, is Sarah Hulsey, and after spending my career as an HR professional, I joined Sage People and am now the head of customer success for Sage People's North American clients, working with HR teams across the globe to maximize technology to better execute their HR strategies. And with that, you have your panel for today. So let's look a bit at what we're going to be learning. The purpose of this first webinar in this series is really to help you get organized and set the team up for success. We are definitely in a strange new environment where sometimes just being able to step back from the day-to-day craziness and understand where we need to go is almost just as important as actually executing on some of these tasks. So we're going to start with a little bit about the data and kind of the importance of the data that HR needs to be looking at and collecting at this time. We're also going to look at some of the specific HR business decisions that HR might be tasked with doing. And this is really taking the stuff from step one. What do you do with that data? And kind of looking a little more in depth about some things that you might want to think about if you haven't already. Next, we're going to look at what's available out there for HR departments. What are some of the resources and tools that you have at your disposal that you may just not have remembered are there? Again, because we're all kind of operating in this crisis situation. And then we're going to talk a little bit about putting on marketing hats and developing a comms plan. And so this agenda here is just going to kind of guide us through this discussion. And I would encourage everyone, if you haven't already, to sign up for the other 2 webinars that we're going to be doing, because today's webinar is leading, it's establishing that foundation for what's to come. And we'll talk a little bit more at that near the end of today's webinar. So with that said, I'd like to start first by talking with RSM. So in RSM's practice, they are hearing firsthand from businesses around the globe, and from my talks with them, they have some really great perspective on really the size of this problem and kind of understanding where are we at, what is the scope of what HR is trying to get their hands around, and kind of their recommendations on what they're seeing clients do at the moment. So Jen and Marni, I would like, please, if you could give our audience some of the background that you're hearing on this situation and what you guys are seeing out there in the force.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sarah. We're so glad to join you today. This is Jen Busse from RSM, and Marni and I just wanted to share some perspective, and we're going to be adding some commentary throughout this webinar But this first slide is really what we consider an anchor, and we've been leveraging this on a lot of our webcasts at RSM, and something that we're sharing with our clients around just the impact of the virus, right? And how it can spread, and how we do need to take precautions as we show up for work, where there are businesses that are essential and still in operation. Think of all of us that are working from home, just the importance on being aware of our own surroundings as we may travel to the grocery store, or we go get gas or get medicines at Walgreens or CVS or Duane Reade, right? There's all of these different perspectives, and there's been a lot of noise, especially from our clients saying, oh my gosh, some of us are all just working at home, but some of us are essential businesses, especially globally. Not every state and every country has followed the same shutdown, rules and procedures. But what we really want to think about is this can spread. It can spread in a lot of different ways. And this is why we're really trying to limit events. The one thing that we have noticed in essential businesses that I think really is important to state is just the precautions on which companies are taking. And so what Marni and I want to do today is really at the highest level go through, and Sarah, if you advance it to the next slide, really look at this from a compliance perspective and look at this from an engagement perspective and what we're seeing. It is important to note that a lot of these that you are looking at are U.S. statistics. We are going to be adding on to this and leveraging our global network with RSM UK as we continue to progress forward. But you all as HR, these are things that we're hearing from our current clients. These are things that we are thinking about daily as we show up and advise our clients and really work things. So the first major bucket is really around compliance and what does that mean to us as HR professionals, and what do we need to do to our businesses. And so if you really think about HIPAA and other privacy regulations, they've changed. You have some essential businesses now that are operating where you actually are allowed to test the temperature, especially in healthcare and essential businesses where you can take the temperature before people report for work. It's really important that we communicate, right, to our work, all the rules and legislation and compliance things that have changed, that we're communicating to our workforce and letting them know how does it impact you, right? And so we've really been seeing a lot of competitors come together through this and working together proactively to say, hey, we're both healthcare, or we're both manufacturing, we're both consumer products, and what are you doing? Because we're all learning through this together. We've never been through something like this. So really think about those impacts and what they're changing. You think about the Family Leave and Short-Term Disability Acts and all of those things that are warranting things, FMLA, Integrated Employer Status, Americans with Disabilities. They've all changed. They've all had at the highest level where you're able to pivot your policies to adhere to this. And it's really important that you get a handle on those and making sure that all the policies are updated, they're communicated. I would encourage everyone, we're seeing a lot of clients that are hanging the updated policies in their plants, putting them on the back of bathroom stalls where they can is an idea we've seen, making sure websites are updated. If there is a communication through some sort of HRIS tool where you can email and text your employee groups, they're going to want to know that. And if you think about the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, what do you do if someone does test positive? The biggest guidance we can give is we want to follow the laws that are to your state or your country, and making sure that if someone does test positive that you quarantine and you notify. And I can tell you what a lot of our clients are doing where they've had people test positive, they're keeping that contained to HR and the direct boss that they need to know, or the impacted employees that might have interacted with that individual. Really thinking about notifications and coordination around existing policies, especially it's a great reminder for those employees that are working at home. What is your work from home policy? If you don't have one, let us know how we can help you with that. We're seeing a lot of policies that are now being updated, and that's something to really think about. And again, as Sarah mentioned, we're going to continue to go through this in these series of webinars. The other thing with compliance that we really want to think about is the Employee Family Medical Leave Act, right? There are employer responsibilities that we all have to take, and we want to make sure that we are in lockstep and coordination with municipality and state requirements and federal regulations. What we have instructed our clients to do, or if you guys have individual questions by state, by industry, by function, Sarah's got our contact information, and we can have a one-off quick call with you all or email you some documents. But if you set up Google Alerts to your state or your municipality, they can give you an update, because these things are changing daily around laws that are updated, even just on the financial side in SBA and all of that stuff. I just really want you all to think about that. Marni, from this slide and this perspective, do you want to share something maybe that you're seeing with some of your clients, or something that we want to highlight before we go to the next slide?
I think your points are spot on, Jen. What we're seeing is HR really needing to triage a lot of these areas. So as new regulations come down, being able to respond to them, interpret the guidance takes a lot of time, and certainly there are day jobs that we're trying to do as well. So Sarah, if you want to pop to the next slide, I can talk a little bit about some of the other things that we're seeing HR face today.
Sure, I will. And before I move to that, though, I do want to kind of call out something that, we're seeing is that, I mean, obviously what you see on the screen here, this is impacting businesses that are working within the United States. But we are seeing obviously a flurry of activity come out of the United Kingdom, of Canada. We're seeing more regulations come out in some of the European countries. And so make sure, I think, RSM is right to call out that compliance and triaging your compliance response is one of the most important things you can do to prepare yourself for down the line. So while we're talking about some US stuff here, make sure that you are checking with your legal department, or if you have a compliance department, or really leverage any of those local tools like Google Alerts. I love that idea, by the way, setting up a Google Alert for changes to EU regulations concerning leave, or I know there's been a lot of information recently about furlough and what you're doing with that. So just anything that we're seeing here, make sure that you're also looking at any other countries in which you have businesses, and especially if you've got employees in those areas. All right, so moving on to this next one here.
Perfect, thanks. So, and we've really just touched on this around what we're seeing our clients having to respond to, almost from a crisis management angle, like how HR is needing to be able to respond, one, to safety in the workplace. So Jen brought up the communication, and ensuring that you have that employee engagement during this crisis response is critical. Making sure that employees feel safe if they are still at the workplace and needing to report to work. How does HR really mandate some of the workplace safety regulations? So we have some clients that need to be OSHA compliant and some that do not, but most that are needing to really be proactive around planning and deployment. So if there is, business continuity policies, following those, or being able to create policy to ensure workplace safety. If somebody does test positive, when can they return back to work? What measures are being put in place to ensure that the rest of the workforce feels safe? Workstations, if you are at a workplace, ensuring that those are 6 feet apart, having to look at physical space and actually restructure things to mandate that workplace safety measures. Sarah brought up a little bit about staffing, but this is what we are talking to clients about all of the time. So whether they are in the mode of downsizing and determining whether or not they're going to furlough, or if they're going to lay off, or if they're going to reduce schedules. And then on the flip side, if they need more people, how are they actually going to staff up and ensure that they can meet the demands of their business? So we're seeing really two different angles of that, and trying to think through how HR can really support what the strategy is around that. So being able to look at the support of employees, where the options are, and what's going to support your business best. There are a number of provisions through, whether it's, the federal government or different country governments that are ensuring that we're helping our clients to think about what is available to them. So are there, credits that small business loans? Are there tax provisions that we could think about supporting employees and businesses through this time? And then there are those very critical roles that you want to retain, and they are critical to your business. And as you go through this crisis, but then come out on the other side, how do you ensure that you keep those critical roles in place? So a lot of what we're talking to our clients about in HR is from a compensation standpoint. How do you enable some compensation design for this type of crisis? Is it an opportunity to reset some of the compensation strategy that you have in place right now to ensure that, you're benchmarked against markets that you're working in, to ensure that you have scalability to be able to even scale up compensation for critical roles. If there's a crisis bonus that can be put in place to incentivize those who are really working, long hours and tirelessly. We are seeing clients that are doing both, right? They're either scaling up some of the pay, or they're also scaling down some of the pay just to ensure that they could retain the workforce during this time. And then from a payroll standpoint, of course, there are a number of our clients that are during this crunch time having trouble actually making payroll. So there are a number of opportunities to think about pay protection and how you can seek refunds and those paid leave credits that are available through certain mechanisms. And those are things that, having HR help the business to determine what options are out there. That's really where, you think about how this can impact your employee group. Jen and I work at a firm where even while we are still employed and we have work to do, our firm has offered a $50 per diem per week to ensure that they're supporting all of our workforce here, and just saying like, hey, we're thinking about you. This is what we can do in this time. And if you don't choose to take this credit, then we're going to donate it to a food bank, which we felt like was really great and does just show, you're working for a company that cares for you. And I think that's really the message that a lot of our clients are trying to send to their workforce. Like, we care about you. We're here for you. We're trying to do whatever we can through this, pandemic that we haven't experienced before to ensure that we're thinking about you first.
I love that, Marni. And I think what's interesting to me, coming from the perspective of our business, which is obviously an HR software provider, is what we are seeing when we talk with people like yourself and Jennifer is that this is very, very common. The things that you are hearing that people are saying, like, we might have to do some layoffs, or we might need to think about incentivizing pay in order to get people to come in and work. It seems to be pretty standard across at least this, mid-sized, company realm. But what I also think is important for us to kind of call out is that all of this stuff, we need to be looking at it. These are things that we need to do. And you actually gave a wonderful teaser for webinar 2, which is all about what can you do with those people who are now, working remotely for the first time? How can you engage with them? How can you ensure that you're communicating in a way to remote workers to where they still feel that they're in the know and are a part of everything? And on the flip side, if you've got workers that are still customer facing and are out there because they are essential personnel, how do you deal with that? How do you ensure all this safety and compliance and all the necessary things that HR is now faced with in this new environment? So that's a great plug for webinar 2 and 3. I hope you guys all attend that.
Hey, Sarah, Sarah, the other thing I would say here is, as you transition to the next slide, knowing that you, me, Marni, we all came from the HR side of the house, is remember the word that this is fluid. It changes regularly. And so it is okay not to know what to do. It is okay to take a little bit of time and think, versus, there's a difference of being proactive versus reactive. And I think this has given us all things to think about, and the fluidity of this and what we're seeing. And it's really important that Marni and I always say, as we're talking to people, your network's your net worth. And it's really relevant here because you need to stay connected with people that are in your competitive landscape, stay connected with your providers. Who are your software providers? Who are your consultants that you work with? Who are your mentors? Just so we can all learn together because this is so new and fluid. And what we don't want to do is cause panic and make decisions that could have the reverse impact. So it's very stressful, and the stress that weighs on the HR professionals to kind of be that in the know type of person. I just want that to be recognized because this is fluid, and a lot of times our C-suite are coming to us going, what do we do? Well, we're all learning together, and we just want to pay attention that this is really fluid and keep that in mind.
That's such a great point, Jennifer, because, if anything, and I'm not trying to purposely add levity to this, very grim situation, but this is really HR's time to shine. These are the things that all of your years of training, your certifications, all of your continuing education credits, all of the classes and courses and webinars you've attended, now is the time to bring together all that information and be able to say, okay, let's not panic, let's take a step back. And let's be the one that drives smart change and smart decisions in the business. So, there's a variety of sizes of HR teams on today's webinar. And, while these are things all of us need to be thinking about, as Jennifer points out, you're not alone. Your network is out there. Make sure that you're leveraging that. And, if you are fortunate enough to, work with a business who works with consultants like RSM, this is a great time to work with an HR consultant in a crisis because they do have the resources at their disposal to make sure that they're staying on top of all of these changes as it changes a mile a minute. So I think that's a wonderful segue into taking a step back. So now we know kind of the scope of what's going on. How do we get started and not overwhelm ourselves? And so the purpose of the rest of this presentation is really for us to step back and organize ourselves. And let's talk about what are the absolute necessities that you should be doing right now so that you can prepare yourself for the big major discussions and decisions that need to be done down the line. So first, let's start with knowing your data. We just heard from RSM about kind of the scope of the issue, and we know, what the statistics are in terms of what might affect our workforces. But it's also important for you to understand, what do you have at your disposal, and do you have this information easily accessible and ready to go? So the goal is to kind of set up HR to be that strategic decision maker, that strategic decision enabler, and cement that role through the use of the data that you as HR professionals have access to. So I've broken this into 3 areas: employment data, business data, and enablement data. Now, hopefully this information is stored easily in an HRIS system, but you may just have it on Excel spreadsheets. It might be something that is stored in a different business unit, such as finance or payroll or IT. So in order to gather this information, you may need to work cross-functionally with another business area. So employee data, just to kind of define as we talk about that, this is the information that you as HR need to execute tasks and support your employees. So this is going to be demographic information, information about your employees. Business data is the information that your business needs to make decisions. So rather than being information about the employee, it's information about the business. This can be things like procedures, it can be SLAs or agreements that you have with clients. It's more business-focused information. And then enablement data is the information that your employees need in order to do their jobs and stay informed, whether they are still in a business as usual circumstance, meaning they're still interacting with the public or clients as needed, or they're now in their new normal of working remotely. So let's focus first on employee data. As I mentioned, a lot of this is going to be demographic data. At a minimum, HR needs to have easy and quick access to all of your employees' emergency contact data, their home phone numbers, their home addresses, information about their absences. So for example, have they already requested some time off later down in the year? That's, as we all probably know, time off and any sort of balances that your employees are carrying, that is a financial liability on your income or on your liability statement. So needing to know, are you going to enforce time off? What are you going to do with any absences that have been requested in the future? That's a decision point for later on down the line. Also, your information about where your employees are. So are they at work? What is their work schedules? Do we have enough information to be able to make decisions about staffing models, about maybe extending or shortening shifts, about changing shifts so that we are minimizing contact? From now, given that it is the 7th of April, I imagine most workers have already relocated back home, or at least to their home country, so you're not really having to worry about that. But if you are in a business that does still require travel, do you have a way of always tracking where your employees are, whether it's through your travel agency, or maybe you use an online tool like Concur or Agencia or some sort of travel booking site, knowing that information. So not only where are they in terms of work, but with COVID-19, are they in self-selected isolation? Have they been placed in quarantine because of a risk of exposure? Are they off because they have actually been told that they have COVID-19 or have tested positive for it? So knowing where your employees are and how to reach them at this time, it's really going to help you, number one, be able to communicate with them because you know how and where. It will also help you as a business be able to evaluate risk. Do I have a risk because I am having to still send employees into an area that's been deemed a hotspot? And of course, by that same token, keep them safe. So employee data, probably, well, let's hope the easiest for you to collect, but absolutely necessary for you to be able to do any of the tasks that we are going to talk about in the rest of this webinar, plus the other two that we have. Now, the next section on business data, I'm really going to want to hear from Jen and Marni about what they're hearing. But just to give a little bit of background on business data, this again is the data about your business that's going to enable you to make those decisions or things that you may need to review in light of COVID-19. So I want you to think of business data as, what expectations have we given our employees, such as, how do they do their jobs? What can they expect as far as how much time off they are allowed? That sort of thing. Also, it's what expectations have we given our clients? Things like service level agreements, or if you have, a guarantee or promise on delivery of services or goods, is that something that now needs to be revised based on how your business is operating? And what information do we as a business need to remain operational? What are our duties as far as union contracts, as far as financial data? How much cash flow do we have? How much does payroll cost? How much is our cash flow? Can we make our next payroll? And of course, as Jennifer and Marni both alluded to, there's all these other policies and procedures that as a business you need to collect and start reviewing ASAP. So Jen and Marni, I know you guys have been working heavily with a lot of clients on this exact sort of thing. So what sort of remediation and policy updates are you seeing as being top of mind for HR departments right now?
Yeah, so I think the first two that I know I have clients working on directly is the ones where they are working at home, is they developed a work from home policy, and it was correlated to their expenses. They were hourly workforce where they could work at home, but the questions that came in from the staff were, are you paying for our internet? Are you paying for our cell phone? And so what they did is quickly reworked a BYOD policy, bring your own device, because they did not have one, and an internet. And much like Marni talked about from the per diem standpoint, they rewrote a policy and allowed each employee to submit an expense report that would cover cell phone and internet expenses for the time that they were working at home. We are seeing a lot of policies being updated and recommunicated out around employee time off. some of that, I've had 2 clients that are not essential businesses, and they want to retain all their staff because the hope is that as we come out of this, you don't have to revamp and rehire and restart everything. And so what they have done, some companies we have seen do a furlough, and I will tell you, they put company procedures in place to check in with their furlough employees to ensure that they're keeping engagement there so they don't lose them. But what I think is really innovative is we've had some of our clients offer to their employee population where they might have dual income or might have the financial means or measures to almost take a sabbatical or use their vacation time now, so they advance their accruals to say, you want to take a month off, and then that limits your paid time off for later. So we've seen a lot of work around that. What I would say is the crisis management, right? This is new to all of us. And so not necessarily a policy, but I've seen companies build a steering committee around this and what do we need to be talking about. And they're almost doing daily stand-up meetings every 30 minutes, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or every day, and just saying, here's what we're hearing from legislation. Here's what we're hearing from our employee group. What is the impact on our business and what do we need to think about? So they've almost fostered that steering committee. What I would tell you by that steering committee, lastly, is you need to make sure that you're covering all of the spectrum, because some of this is emotional. You don't know how everybody's going to react and feel. Some of it's financial, so you want to make sure. Some of it's IT, right, that you've got everything covered. So that's what I would say, Sarah, that we're seeing. And then lastly, please pay attention if you do have union workforces. They're different in every state and every country. And you have to be in lockstep, as you all know, as HR professionals, with your union on how and when you're communicating. So I think that's a phenomenal call out, Sarah. Marni, anything to add?
Yeah, I would just add that we are seeing a lot of discussion about how to administer leave. So in things like, the Family First Act and the CARES Act, and where you have states and areas that have paid leave policies that need to be now implemented. That's really incumbent upon HR to figure out the administration of that. So that's taking some time to really go through and interpret what the eligibility is. And we talked a little bit before about the return to work policy. So incumbent upon our clients to really figure out what their return to work policy is. So that's been a shift in what the practice was before, not to really have a return to work policy necessarily. The other thing that I think Sarah brought up a great point in having easy access to your data for, to know your employees and just to know who you have on your workforce is really key around making decisions, because we're now seeing clients that are having to make some very tough decisions around layoffs and how they're going to support their ongoing business. And I was talking to a client today that actually started to uncover that they had some employees on payroll that they really hadn't accounted for in the data that they were pulling. So being able to make informed decisions and then determine how you're going to support your business going forward, it's really critical to have a one-stop shop and one single source of truth for that data.
Absolutely. I mean, I myself have been, guilty of in my in my former HR life of operating on nothing but Excel spreadsheets and having to, take several hours to pull together, okay, who do I actually have on my workforce? Because you're right, it's not just employees that are on your payroll. There might be contractors, there might be interns, there might be people who are just, whether it's, a gig economy sort of thing where they kind of freelance for you or whatnot. There's a lot more consideration. So while, I in no way I'm trying to make this a plug for HR systems, this is where having one is really going to benefit you. And if it's something where maybe you haven't invested a lot of your own time in how can I leverage my HR systems to do reporting and really understand the data that's in there, make sure that you're getting on the phone with your customer success manager or account manager or whomever it is that you work with at that company. leverage it. This is what it's there for, to make sure that you know who you're talking with. And I think that's such a great thing to have. And Marni, something you mentioned also on that kind of staffing proponent, or it might have been Jen who mentioned it. I know we spoke to a client last week who they also are really trying to get through this without having to do some sort of layoff, because they work in a skilled trade. And as I'm sure all of you know on the line, if you have skilled professionals in your workforce that are hard to hire for, that's probably very top of mind when it comes to who are not only our critical personnel for actually being able to operate now, but who are the critical personnel that we're going to need next month, 6 months from now, a year? Who are the people that we can't afford to lose? So all of these are great ideas on how this business data needs to be pulled together. So let's tie it a little bit back to, now we've talked about what does HR need to know about their employees, what does the business need to know about what they have, what they don't have, and what their policies are. The third area of data that you need to be gathering is, how do employees do their job where they're at? So this is going to be, do your employees have access to things like contact lists? It sounds really simple, but once you have a workforce that is now completely remote, they no longer can, go to the office manager or the receptionist or the bulletin board in the break room and look up extensions. They're going to have some other way of getting that information. So this is another area where leveraging your HRIS to be able to hopefully push that data out to employees, or like a company intranet, anything like that. So contact lists are going to be key. What are the communication procedures that your employees need to be aware of? So for example, if they are potentially exposed, what does an employee do if they have contracted the illness? What does the employee need to communicate to their boss or their department lead or HR as far as work hours, as far as how are they doing their job? What do they need as far as materials go or technology? So how are they going to communicate with you? What are the work procedures that are now in place? I think probably every single one of our businesses has had some sort of change to the norm, whether it's working from home or now you're having to don PPE in order to do your job, or have changes to shifts work in order to make this happen. And then also, what are the resources that your employees have available to them in order to not only execute their job, but to still maintain some semblance of work-life balance, and also to be able to just provide for their subsistence needs. In the next webinar that we do, we're actually going to be bringing a lot of this back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which many of you HR professionals have dealt with before. But really keep that top of mind when you're talking about enablement data. What are the things that employees need to really still work in this new framework? So now we've got our data together, it's time to start talking about the decisions that HR needs to make. And we've already alluded to several of these. So I want to first talk about a little story here. So one of the decisions that a lot of people are having to make is remote work. And it's remote work, and sometimes that's for like your entire group. Other times it's just for a proportion of your workforce. So we spoke with a customer last week, and one of the decisions they needed to make is, how do we communicate with our workers now that we're no longer in the office? Because they had a setup where you have a hub office and then field workers who come in and out of that office to get assignments, get information, collaborate on some work, and then they're back in the field. And so what this client decided to do is they sent all of their field office workers home. They're now working remotely, and so now there's no longer that interaction between them and the field workers. But they have almost all their field workers have a mobile device, obviously. So they're no longer going into an office where they can access a computer to be able to get this information, but they still had mobile phones. So they leveraged their HR system to turn on features that would be accessible via mobile so that they can still communicate with these employees who are out in the fields who now no longer have access to computers at their work site. So it's a good example of saying, okay, do I need to make a change to an existing procedure or policy? How am I going to communicate it to these individuals? How am I going to enforce it? And what are we going to do going forward? So it's a great kind of example of how you can take a less than ideal situation, think a little outside the box, leverage the tools that you have, and make some tough decisions. So when you're looking at all the data that you've collected, as we just mentioned, the first step needs to be, do we need to revise any policies? Of course, as you all know, your policies are your backbone. It is a thing that helps you in terms of enforcement. It helps as an enabler, and it also helps as an engagement tool. And so making sure that you've revised any policies so that employees have clarity about what the new norm is. That's going to be key. It's all about providing confidence in that the business knows what they're doing. It's about providing clarity of expectations and purpose so that employees know what is expected of them. And it's about providing mechanisms to make sure that not only your business is compliant with all of this ever-changing information that's going out there, but also are they doing things that are still going to enable their workers to have a good experience no matter their situation. So how are you going to communicate any of those changes to business as usual? Are you going to utilize an HR system or an intranet? Are you just going to rely on email? Do you have a phone tree? Do you have, any other kind of, whether it's text or push notifications? How are you going to do this communication? Key that Marni mentioned is this absence tracking, and that definitely is the same that we're hearing amongst our clients. Having the procedures put in place to make sure that you are tracking absence and illness related information accurately right now seems to be, from our customers, top of mind. So do you need to make changes to your absence tracking software? Do you need to work with your HRIS provider to add in new absence reasons, to change rules? Maybe you have never allowed carryover of time off, but maybe now you want to for a small period of time to get people through this period. Or, what are the procedures that my employees need to know if they experience symptoms? So all these things that we never had before, you might need to have now. So Marni, I think it was you who were telling me that, you're seeing some kind of interesting information in this space as far as these decisions that people are making about changes. And I know you just spoke to them a little bit, but, are you seeing a lot of clients come to you asking about kind of COVID-19 specific policies, like if someone tests positive, or are people still focusing more on the business as usual policies and procedures?
I think it's a mix of both, certainly, that we're hearing. A lot is immediate response to things like, what do I do if a worker tests positive? What am I able to do, from a compliance standpoint to, one, ask and ensure that I'm not violating anything around HIPAA? How can I mandate, that this worker stays home? When can I let them back at work? Do I need to quarantine others who were in contact with them? So it's evaluating really on a case-by-case basis, but setting up a procedure and a policy, let's say, for what you do if a coworker tests positive. So HR is really needing to think proactively about, even before things are happening, what do we need to have in place to be able to respond effectively? So while some of that is in response to what's occurring, we're also seeing, more of the preparedness from HR to say, what do I need to get out in front of, as we think through some of the impact to the business?
Absolutely.
Jen, do you want to add anything there?
No, I think that's perfect, Marni. I think it's really about making sure that we're talking. And what I would say lastly is making sure you're documenting, right? Really making sure that you in HR have a secure space that you can document any activity, especially if it's sensitive information like this from a medical perspective, that you, your legal team, or whom you all seem appropriate got. So key documentation that is secure is really, really important.
That's a good point, and we're going to be covering a little bit more of that in our third webinar, which is all about the HR team itself. Not only, preparing for some of those really, really tough business decisions that we never as HR professionals want to make about, RIFs or layoffs or bankruptcy, but also talking about the importance of mitigating HR burnout at a time like this and how to evaluate that in your own team. And how does an HR team who's used to being able to sit next to each other and ask questions or have ad hoc meetings, how do you as an HR team shift to a fully remote workspace? And as Jen pointed out, have a place where you can still document this confidential information. And so yeah, but if you're interested in more of that sort of thing, please join us for the third webinar. And then it also is a nice segue into resources and tools, because you do have to have some tools, resources, or at the very least, a thought out process about how you are going to do a lot of these things and where you're going to get assistance. In webinar 2, we're specifically going to be talking about resources that you have for engaging workers, whether it's remote working tools, remote engagement tools, ideas for how to still keep up morale and engagement when you're no longer present right in front of them, or maybe you're working in a high stress situation. But right now, let's shift our focus to what are some resources that you as HR professionals might not have, already taken advantage of. Hopefully, you've already contacted all these groups. So of course we've got EAPs. I made the comment the other day that this is probably going to be the best year ever for EAPs, because finally everyone's going to know what they are and what they do, because hopefully people are going to be leveraging them. There is a reason that your benefits broker has probably rolled in an EAP to your benefits offering. So employee assistance programs are great ways for you to help alleviate some of the load on HR by taking this and making sure that employees know, look, here's a place where you can go for X, Y, and Z. Here are some things that they can help you with. Government assistance programs. Most countries, in addition to most states, and I think even some local municipalities, have put assistance programs in place, whether it's for small businesses or for help with unemployment, advocacy groups, all that sort of things. Your HRIS, definitely talk with your providers. Who are the partners that you are working with? Who are your vendors? And, I think I am very pleased to say that, both Sage people and our, others who are in this HRIS space, we are all trying to step up as best we can and act as that strategic partner for you. This is, if there is a silver lining to anything that's going on, it's that people are coming together to help. And so make sure that you are speaking with your vendors on how they can assist you in getting these things done. Of course, in intranet, I've already mentioned, can you leverage push notifications on mobile device via your HRIS? Do you have a text list so that you can just do a bulk text? Are you speaking with your benefits brokers? A good benefits broker, and I've worked with some excellent ones over my career, are almost an extension of your HR team, especially when it comes to understanding what is available out there and connecting you with resources. And of course, there's SHRM. If we're looking at, a US specific resource, Society of HR Management has a wealth of information. Their equivalents in the other countries that I've worked with also are producing a great amount of information. I've even seen some of these websites waive the membership fee to get access to information because, again, everyone's just trying to help. So make sure that you're looking at those resources. Jen, I know that, with RSM, you've also seen some information that HR might not necessarily be aware of because it's normally not part of your purview, but actually has some really great benefits that might help either the business or employees. I think you were talking something about loans the other day that you heard about.
Yeah, so it also ties into what I was saying on the front end and how you share information with your competitors. But we had an example of a client that was actually going to go apply for the SBA loan, and they were able to do so and hoping to secure some of that money for payroll and for taxes to prepay. And although they didn't think they needed the SBA loan, they went ahead and applied for it because it was a lower interest rate. And then what they did is when the hope is when they get the money, they're going to pay off another loan at a highest interest rate and use that money that they get from the SBA to funnel payroll and some other things. So I really think, to what was said earlier, this is a time for HR to shine. We've all been HR professionals at some point in our life. We have felt like a redheaded stepchild. That's what I always say, or, you know, the last resort. But this is our time to really showcase our ability to be true HR business partners and be that advisor and have that perspective. We should have a seat at the table and be included in these C-level conversations. And I think that's something we can talk to finance about. Given the size of our certain companies, you know, hey, is our company applying for these SBA loans, and can we shift that money to leverage payroll and taxes that could benefit us in the short term to benefit us in the long term? So I think that's really important to think about. And I would say lastly, make sure you're going together, finance, IT, HR, with all of these resources. Finance and IT also has resources at their peer view. We know there's a lot with IT right now around cybersecurity and all of that and so forth. So making sure that you're having your check-ins with your peer group and subordinates and manage up consistently. Marni and I have been talking a lot to our teams there with us and with our clients to make sure our resources, we're checking in above, and if we have a responsibility, making sure we're following up and following through to show that advisory side that we all have, and leveraging resources even outside of HR that can help the business prevail and succeed, especially as it relates to our employees. So really important stuff here, Sarah.
That's great. So I'm just cognizant of time here. Realize that we're almost at the top of the hour, so I'm going to speed through this last bit because there have been some really great questions coming in that we want to try to get to. So let's talk briefly about, you know, communication considerations. So this is where I mentioned early on, make good friends with your marketing team. Marketing is wonderful about communication, and I'm not saying that HR is not, because I actually think HR is a really good group when it comes to understanding what is the message I'm trying to get out, what is the important thing I'm trying to getting out, and how do I get it out to my employees. But working with your marketing team is going to be very important because, number one, they might have resources that you don't in terms of being able to do you know, bulk emails, newsletters. They may even have access to recording software, websites, virtual tools such as, you know, GoToWebinar that you can also leverage in HR. So make sure that you're building a good relationship if you don't have anyone. But what we want to take from this is just the basics of a comms plan for HR that you need to be developing with your team. Everyone's heard that, you know, communication is all about who, what, when, where, why, and how. So in the context of COVID-19, the who is obviously who is the audience that I'm trying to reach. Is it employees that are currently working for me? Is it alumni that I may want to contact to see if they would come back to work? Is it people that I have designated as a talent pool that I want them to consider coming to work for my company now because I've got openings? What, of course, is the content that you're trying to communicate? Frequency of communication becomes extremely important when you are in a remote workforce, as many of us are now. Sometimes it's an adjustment to figure out what frequency is right for your business. Storage, where is the communication stored? Is it going to be, you know, just kept in email servers, or is it something that we're going to document and actually add to a document repository or SharePoint or a handbook? Why? This is all about transparency. So especially when you can no longer see your workers, being transparent and having them understand that you are giving them open, honest communication really does become key. And then the how, of course, is the method. What method are you using to get it out there? So also, you know, on top of just thinking through the 6 items there, think about what are the touch points that I now have with my employees. Of course, you need to be communicating anytime there is a change to business as usual. You also need to think about what is the information employees want because it's making them feel more secure. Things like business news, what's happening with with the company. They want to know that. You may think it's being a little too transparent, but your employees are going to feel as though you're hiding something if you're not at least giving some information about how the business is doing. Of course, just checking in to say, hey, how are you today? It can just be a kind of a health check. If you want to communicate best practices to them about, ergonomic setup for your home office, about safety when interacting with, the public, things like that. And then, of course, just general engagement touch points. So interacting with your employees, whether it's virtually or on a video chat or something to still engage them and make them feel that even though we are out now also disparate and disconnected, we are still part of the same organization. So I do want to, again, make a little plug for the next 2 webinars here, because we will be talking more specifically about communication as it comes to engagement, and then of course communicating some of the bigger decisions that HR needs to be aware of. Just going to fly through this last slide really quickly, but other communications considerations, make sure that you are providing a mechanism for employees to give you feedback. This 2-way communication becomes even more important in a crisis situation, and doubly important in a crisis situation where your employees might be remote. They need to know that there is a place for open and honest communication, whether it's via virtual check-ins or continuous conversations. Many of you may have that in your HR tools. Just make sure that you're actively asking for it. Tone becomes very important, just like many marketing teams these days are taking out language such as, the war on talent or anything that's more like of an aggressive tone. You also want to do that with your employees. Be very cognizant of the meanings of words and how they might be perceived by the person on the other end of that communication. And then, of course, balance the heavy with a little fun. We had a client the other day who put a survey up on our software that has, just how are you doing? How are you spending your COVID-19 time? And it was a nice blend of like humor, what's the craziest thing you've eaten for lunch because you can no longer go outside? And important, how are you coping with this? So just make sure that you're doing a little balance. So with that, in 3 minutes, I want to get to some of the questions. But before I do that, Jen and Marni, kind of anything to add on the communication front?
I think this has been great. I think communication and transparency is key. Everyone worries right now, and so what we can share and what we can tell about our businesses or the impact, let's do it and let's be thoughtful. I also think from the engagement standpoint, it's really around the engagement with our employee population and our customer population. Really checking in, being thoughtful, showing the values of your company and how we can go together. I think that's really, really important, and really grateful to share some of this information today.
Absolutely. So here's a question that came in. The individual says, I currently use Excel for keeping up with my employee and business data, and it's becoming more difficult now that we're all remote. How can I stay more organized and make sure I'm not missing important information? Jen and Marni, any ideas on your front there?
Marni and I see this all the time. It's like death by Excel, and it is what it is. And we still use Excel for certain things, right? So Marni and I have seen a lot of clients that take Excel and really make sure that it's all organized in certain formats from a tab standpoint. So what is critical information, and what I would say, what is in Excel, how it is stored, and who it is shared with. You want to keep that up to date. And making sure that the people that are leveraging it and utilizing it are trained on it, making sure that it's password protected, making sure that not anyone can just go in and edit it, and really boils down to security permissions. The good news with Excel, a lot of things that are in Excel that might one day get into a system, you are able to do that. We've been helping a lot of customers right now at no charge, just with business cases on why they might need a module of an HRIS system. So many times people get all overwhelmed and think it's everything. I'm working with one company right now, very small. They don't have a lot of money. They're leveraging Excel. And what we're doing is we're working with 3 vendors we have a partnership with just to figure out how do we do just for HR to get all that employee data in one spot versus turning on everything. It's what do I need to do my job versus what is nice to have.
I think that's a great point, and it's something, one of our clients actually said to us the other day that this crisis has enabled them to provide basically incontrovertible proof of the necessity of having a global HR system where your data is stored and can be securely shared with those who need it. So it's really helped them kind of reaffirm their business case. So, Excel can be great depending on the size of your business and what you're doing with it. But unless you have a way of either doing document sharing, secure document sharing, let's put that caveat in there, it does make it different. It does make a difference in terms of, is your data accurate, all that sort of stuff. There are some kind of shared versions of Excel, like using Google Docs or Smart Sheets or that sort of thing. Those can be also great alternatives. So just, I would say definitely reach out to groups like, us or RSM if you want some ideas on that front. I realize we are out of time. There were several wonderful questions about engagement and keeping up to date on resources. We'll continue to get this information in the next 2 webinars. We've got the dates and times up there. We encourage you to register. Sage People also has a COVID-19 hub. This is specifically a little bit more about the utilization of technology to help you during this time, but we invite you all to take a look, sagepeople.com/COVID-19. And RSM also has some amazing resources on their website as well. So with that said, thank you so much for your attendance today. We will get back to those of you who had questions if we're able, and I hope everyone is staying happy and healthy and safe. Jen and Marni, thank you so much for attending this. We are so grateful to have your expertise and leadership on today's call, and look forward to the next 2 in the series.
Thanks, Sarah.
All right, everyone, have a wonderful day and take care.